here as always to walk you through all things college basketball, everything that we've seen over the past 7 days, and plenty more, because here we are at the end of February, just 1 day left after today. That's right, the next time that we see a full college basketball slate, it will be March. And that means that we are less than a week away from these mid-major conferences, a lot of them getting their conference tournaments started. We get to see the first NCAA tournament bids punched here just not long at all from now, about a week from today. That, of course, means that we are a week away from the end of the regular season, which then gives way to the high major conference tournaments. And then we are just a week away at that point from Selection Sunday. So much for us to talk about this time of year. We've got fresh bracketology numbers out. We've got this conversation about the SEC. How many teams will they get into the NCAA tournament? How big of a role does it play what the teams at the top do? We'll get into all of that in the second segment. I think there's a lot to unpack there from the SEC and what's going on across that conference over the last couple of days in particular, and entering these last 3 games that those teams have on their regular season schedule headed into conference tournament play, where, of course, we know anything can happen. But here in the first segment, before we get to that, we are going to talk about Utah firing Craig Smith. A little bit out of left field decision there. Not much chatter across college basketball about that move being something that was just on the radar, or even, coming around the corner as quickly as it did. But with no NCAA tournament appearances over 3 full seasons, does not look like they will get there this season either. The Utes make the decision in their first year in the Big 12 to move on. We also got some news over the weekend that we will talk about here in the first segment. Jay Lucas is probably going to become the next head coach at Miami. He is currently the Duke assistant who's responsible for a lot of their big gets on the recruiting trail. So we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. But before we do, we've got to get into this Craig Smith situation at Utah. Fired over the weekend after a loss to UCF, where the Utes did kind of fall apart and take that loss. Over his 4 seasons, he has made his way from 11-20 up to 17-15, up to 22-15, which included a deep run in the NIT. And then this year, and I think importantly, this year, their first year in the Big 12, which is a little bit better of a basketball conference than what the Pac-12 was last season. Utah 15-12 before he was fired. Now, it's an interesting decision here because, as you can tell from those numbers, there has been an upward trajectory here. At least he was going to match what he did over years 2 and 3. He's got a decent roster. It's nothing particularly special in the Big 12, at least, but they decide to move on from a coach who had incredible success at his last stop within the state, Utah State. He had, of course, 2 NCAA tournament appearances. That other year was the COVID year. They would have likely made it in that season as well. So a coach who has had quite a bit of success then gets to Utah, clearly starts from a position of having to rebuild. Doesn't fully get there over the course of 4 years, but now they're going to move him out. And all I can think is that this has to tie directly to the Big 12 move and the recent success of BYU. We'll start with the Big 12 move, the increase in revenue, the increase in the television deal that they are signed up to. There's more money flowing through the program. There's more excitement within the fan base, within the boosters, about what Utah athletics can be. So, if you're Utah, do you capitalize on that? Maybe you just believe that Craig Smith maybe isn't the right fit, but you've got the resources to go get someone who is the right fit. That would be the play here. If there is a candidate out there that they believe fits them better, I can totally understand this move. If they want to go make a splash hire, similar to what BYU did when their head coach, Mark Pope, was poached by Kentucky, they went out and they got an NBA assistant, Kevin Young. They backed him with a ton of NIL resources. They go out, they land Yegor Dimon. They get Cannon Catchings to flip his commitment. Then they follow it up in the next year. They get AJ DeBonsta. They have Xavier Staten coming in to anchor the center position. There is a lot going on at BYU, and if you're Utah, you can't let that go unchecked. So again, if you don't think that Craig Smith is going to get you there in the end, if you have your doubts and you make that move quickly to get out in front of it, to make sure that you can keep up with BYU, I understand that. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago before Alabama and Auburn squaring off in the 1 versus 2 matchup, how those two programs kind of jockey for position, make some moves occasionally to keep up with each other, to make sure that they are never viewed under the other program. That happens all across the country. Happened this offseason. You look at Ohio State and Michigan, both making coaching changes, both trying to fight to get the best candidates out there on the market. Then they, of course, battle in the transfer portal. They battle on the court. This goes on and on. We can go across all kinds of different rivalries. You never want your rival to have the upper hand. And if you can make a move that you feel like will put you on top, you make that move whenever the opportunity presents itself. But this opens up the question, both of these topics here open up the question for Utah. What is the plan? Do you have your NIL lined up and ready to go? It's going to have to be there. You're paying a buyout. You're going to bring in a new coach at a new salary. Hopefully, they have at least a short list of guys there that they know will come who can take this Utah program to the next level. But to entice those coaches to come, you're going to have to deliver that NIL package and some promises of what you're going to do on the administrational side to catch BYU. So it'll be interesting to see which way they go. I think that's one of the jobs that I'll be following pretty closely, just because I think it is an interesting position to fill. Also, not afraid. I think Craig Smith will land on his feet. I think that he's going to be a top candidate for some of these, particularly the mid-major openings that come open. As I mentioned, his Utah State run of success that he had. I think that he definitely can coach and will be presented a new job whenever he is ready to jump back into the market. But another job that I have been looking at and landed on an interesting candidate is Miami. Turns out Jay Lucas appears to be the front runner there to land that job, and reports mixed bag whether it is going to be agreed upon or if they've talked about it and he's the front runner. There's all kinds of different reports out there you can go find. It appears that he will become the head coach. It probably is a matter of time with the season still ongoing and negotiations, of course, as there is with any contract. A lot of times after they agree to become the head coach, there is still some negotiating left to do on the contract. So it appears that Lucas will take over at Miami, and it's a very interesting hire. I am a big fan and don't want to tip things too much because I have coaching grades that will come out once this hire becomes official. I believe will be the first addition to come out if the hire is not officially announced until after that first weekend of the NCAA tournament. Then it will likely come out at the same time as the rest of that first batch that will be filled over the course of that next week. So, what was Miami looking for here? Clearly, we discussed when that job came open, when Jim Larinaga retired, that there were two options. One, you could try to keep the status quo. You could try to go get somebody who would run things the way that Jim ran it and hope that it was Jim's just old age, just the new elements that were introduced into this that he just didn't have the juice to get it done on a regular basis. Or you could say there is something wrong here. It worked in the past. It does not work now. We need to hit reset. And they hit reset in a big way. They go for one of the youngest, best up and coming coaches in all of college basketball. Lucas has been on some incredible staffs, worked under some Hall of Fame coaches throughout his time on the sideline. He has been labeled as one of the best recruiters, period, in college basketball, college athletics, really. He was the lead guy on Cooper Flag, yes. The Boozers, yes. Plenty of others that Duke has landed in recent memory. He is right there as one of the responsible parties for getting them on campus. So he has great experience on the bench as an assistant. He has, of course, not just been the recruiter for those teams, he has worked alongside these players who have made big leaps in their game while he was coaching. And so now he comes to Miami, which of course has, at least on the football side, and we know at times on the basketball side across multiple other sports as well, provided ample, plenty of NIL resources. It has been about how you manage it, how you use it, and that was one of the issues, trying to put in the footwork needed to get everything done on the NIL, on the transfer portal, with recruiting, all of the elements that came together. It just wasn't happening over the last couple of seasons at Miami in the way it needed to. So Lucas, of course, is going to get NIL backing as a new head coach there. We know that he can recruit. We know he has the connections. I'm sure that his staff will be well built. I think that this is about as good as Miami could have done outside of potentially being able to poach a top candidate with this idea that they were going to invest really big money into this thing. Of course, the downside here, the one thing that we can point at and say, all right, let's pump the brakes. We're not going to fully know anything about this hire for at least a year because Lucas is going to be in his first head coaching job. And so how does he handle that? There is so much that goes into being a head coach versus an assistant coach. And that has only been heightened in recent years. He has so much more on his plate now, and I am sure that he is prepared for it, that he has been preparing for it for quite some time now. But it is still a big job in a big market, a large fan base there, and it can obviously become overwhelming for even veteran coaches. But I do have confidence that he will get off to the right start. I think that they are going to have a big portal class. I think that this is one of those rosters that we're going to look at in the preseason and say, look, it might not be top 25 in the way too early rankings just because we haven't seen it fit together, just because we haven't seen him on the sideline as a head coach before. But they're going to be right there in the mix. They're going to be on the teams that we are considering for one of those spots, I believe. in a couple of months. When we come back on the other side, we're going to talk about the SEC because they have some interesting things brewing here. Plenty of teams on the bubble, plenty of teams in the mix at the top of bracketology. Can they get to 13, which would, of course, smash the record of 11 set by the Big East? And is 14 teams in play? We'll do that right here on the other side. Welcome back into the second segment here of the day on Three True Values. We got to talk about the SEC because we've talked about it all season. We talked about it in the preseason. Even last year, I kind of made it clear that I thought this would be the year the Big East record went down, whether that meant the Big 12, whether it meant the SEC, the Big 10. It has clearly been the SEC's race to run here, and they are going to smash this 11-team record. It appears that 12 might be the absolute minimum that the SEC can land inside the bracket. 13 looks pretty likely, and 14 is very much in play still at this moment. So as we look through the standings, we'll start up at the top of the bracket where Auburn, of course, is the clear number one overall seed. Nothing much we need to say about them right now. They have separation, even from Duke behind them. I think they can take another loss and still be the number one overall team in the bracket once we get to Selection Sunday. And that is before anything else happens below them. So really, it could be Auburn's here with pretty much nothing they can do to slide beyond maybe number two overall in this bracket. So there's Auburn up top. Then you've got in the mix, you've got Alabama, Florida, and Tennessee all right there clumped together, all with good conference records, and all in the mix for a 1 seed in March Madness. So right now, Alabama, the only of those three that is in a 1 seed position in the latest bracketology projections, came out this morning. But Florida and Tennessee both right there on the edge as well. You got the other top teams that are in the mix here for a top 4 seed. Those would include Missouri, Texas A&M, and Kentucky. So we've already listed here 7 teams that are going to be among the top 4 seeds. And what that does for these teams that are on the bubble that we'll get to here in a moment is it gives them endless opportunities. If they win a game, it immediately boosts their resume almost a full seed line. If they lose a game, it really doesn't damage the resume that much. Because the games that they're playing, they are not expected to win. No one else around them in the standings would be expected to win that game either. So it doesn't impact your wins above bubble in any real way. Your net ranking, Kim Pom, it might impact a little bit. But for the most part, the games that matter for these bubble teams are going to be the games against other bubble teams because it's a free shot when you get a matchup against one of those teams that I have already mentioned. Then safely in the field, we've still got Ole Miss and Mississippi State. I think Vanderbilt is moving themselves slowly towards that category as well. They're not all the way there, but they are getting there pretty close to making that the case. But as we move down into this next tier, this is where things get really interesting because we've got all of the SEC teams now have 3 games left to play. And we have Arkansas, Georgia, Texas, and Oklahoma all on the bubble. 4 SEC teams jockeying for position here. Last night, we saw Arkansas get a big win over Texas. That moved Arkansas to the top of this pack. It moved Texas, I think, to the bottom. Right now, as of the numbers that I ran this morning, there are 14 SEC teams in the NCAA tournament. my bracketology projects that if the selection committee sat down today, that would be the case. However, the selection committee does not sit down today. There's 3 more games plus a conference tournament left to go. So what does that mean here? Well, unfortunately, for some of these teams, it means that they have got to create cushion before the conference tournament. They have to get one of these free shots. To get to 14, you cannot have these teams beat up on each other to boost their resumes as much as they beat up on the top teams, or at least skate by against the top teams, to then provide themselves that distance needed, move them up that full seed line that they need to move up, to then give themselves the cushion, because 3 games left to play, which means that Arkansas is the only of these teams that can actually reach a 500 record in conference play. They are 6-9 right now, 3 games to play. 5-10 Georgia, 5-10 Texas, 4-11 Oklahoma. Now, we've talked about Oklahoma in the past. Their resume, look, the non-conference, it gave them a big boost. But Texas and Georgia, right there on the bubble. And I know that we have kind of in the past created this 500 threshold in league play. That clearly was going to go out the window when we started looking at this SEC schedule. It just wasn't going to be feasible that we could place that expectation, because Mississippi State is currently below 500. And they are projected to be a 6 seed right now. Kentucky is 1 game over 500 and a projected 3 seed. That's how strong this conference is. So I'm not going to use 500 as a baseline, but it is a good reference point for historically what we're talking about here with this conference, with the strength that they are facing night in and night out. So now we look at Oklahoma, Georgia, Texas. If we say Arkansas has that little bit of an edge above them, you've got a different case for each of them. Georgia's computer numbers are not as bad as I think some people think. Now, they went on a horrific skid recently, but now they have a win over Florida. What does that do for them? I think it is a big game changer for the Bulldogs. I've got them just barely above that last 4 in. I've got Oklahoma just barely in the last 4 in. I think Georgia and Oklahoma can pretty much be flip-flopped however you want. I'm giving it to Georgia because Oklahoma also had one of those terrible runs of form where they lost and lost and lost again. They also got a big win. But they only have 4 wins in conference play. Yes, the non-conference, strong, has helped them. And then you've got Texas, who just keeps taking a few too many losses that damage the resume. It feels like they have not been able to capitalize as much on these big opportunities, and they're going to have to at least once down the stretch to get themselves in. Because the reality is here, as they beat up on each other, as they take their free shots at these top teams, as they look to take care of business against LSU and South Carolina, which of course Texas did not do. That's another thing that has dinged them hard on this resume. I think if you just take that South Carolina loss off, Texas is probably right up there with Arkansas still, feeling decent about their position, but they're not. So now we look over this last week and then into the conference tournament. Well, by default, the conference tournament, you can only add 1 more loss to the resume, which is good news. Except everyone else can continue building their resume after you're knocked out. And in the SEC, the way that the Tournament is formatted this year. There will be 4 games in the first round. So the bottom 8 teams in the conference will be playing each other on the opening night. What does that mean based on the current conference standings? Well, it means that Mississippi State would be playing South Carolina. So you would heavily favor Mississippi State. They're, of course, pretty firmly in the field. Vanderbilt would get to play LSU. Again, I said they're a little bit above this group. That leaves these teams that are right there on the bubble to face each other. It'd be Arkansas against Oklahoma and Georgia against Texas. So if the only thing that you add to your resume is a loss, suddenly you got a negative out of playing in the conference tournament. And that's before one of these teams on the bubble, whether it's an SMU who does not have quad one wins, but they're on the table somewhere along the way in the ACC tournament. They're out there if they can go find them. You've got Nebraska. Plenty of big opportunities in that Big Ten tournament. If they can win 1, 2, 3 games, they're going to move up. Same with North Carolina. You look at West Virginia, even Boise State, who has kind of climbed back in here by beating some of the top teams in the Mountain West. If they can keep beating the top teams in the Mountain West, look out for them in the conference tournament. So is it likely that the SEC gets to 14 teams? Probably not. Even though, as of today, that's where they stand, I think the likely outcome is 13. Worst case is probably 12. That's where we stand, but they are definitely going to clip the 11, and from there, it is just a matter of how far they can extend this record out. When we come back on the other side, we'll get you out of here as we do every week with the games of the week, everything you need to watch in this last week of college basketball's regular season, right here on 3 True Values. Welcome back in as we wrap up the show today. We've got the games of the week for you, everything you need to watch to keep in touch with college basketball as we have said multiple times over the course of this episode, wrap up the regular season for the high majors, get into conference tournament play for some of the mid majors as well. So here we go. On Thursday night, we've got Rutgers against Michigan. Rutgers, of course, has 2 NBA draft prospects. They don't have much in terms of postseason aspirations, but Michigan does. They are a potential top 4 seed, tied, but do not have the tiebreaker against Michigan State right now in the Big Ten standings. So they need to hold serve. They need to pick up this win if they want to lift the regular season crown by the end of this. On Friday, we've got Purdue and UCLA facing off, another Big Ten matchup on the way. We have got UCLA, who kind of found themselves and is kind of just cruising along now under Mick Cronin, and Purdue, who is struggling in recent weeks. They had kind of made it look like they might be able to really kind of contend and play just solid basketball. They have not been able to pick up results in the last couple of games, but looking to get back on track here. Then on Saturday, we've got one of the biggest marquee matchups you can get this late in the season. We've got Alabama against Tennessee. A 1 seed is on the line in bracketology. I'm telling you guys right now, whoever wins that game will be a 1 seed in Sunday's bracketology. The other one will land on the 2 seed line. Then on Sunday, we've got Michigan State and Wisconsin. Michigan State, the other team in the Big Ten, right there trying to compete for that regular season title. Wisconsin kind of on the outside looking in now, but Wisconsin and Michigan State both 2 seeds. So we will see which one of them comes out on top. Could be that whichever one does win is a 2 seed in the next bracketology. The other one potentially could slide down the board. Then on Sunday, We are going to go ahead on Monday, we have got Kansas against Houston. We're going to check out that big matchup between two teams who early in the season probably we would have thought this was for a 1 seed. Instead, Houston is battling to hold on to their 1 seed spot. Kansas is trying to, um, I think they're safe from the bubble now. They've kind of climbed back up into that 6 seed conversation, but they're trying to get things right. And it has not gone well to this point for the Jayhawks, who had national title aspirations, preseason #1 in the AP poll. They've got to get things rolling in the right direction if they're going to make any noise in March. Then on Tuesday, we are going to divert our attention a little bit away from these big games that are going on. We are going to watch mid-major tournaments. There's plenty of them that will be going on. Round 1, round 2, quarterfinals, semifinals, whatever is on the TV, check it out, because these are the games that determine who your Cinderella teams, your Cinderella picks are going to be when that bracket comes out a week and a half later. So let's check that one out for sure. And then on Wednesday, we'll get back to it. We'll watch Florida and Alabama. Another one that whoever wins that game very well could end up on the 1 seed line. The other one could end up on the 2 seed line, depending on the results across the rest of college basketball. The SEC is delivering some of the biggest games down the stretch here. We'll see how Alabama copes with it, because if Alabama can win out, they could potentially catch Duke at least for that #2 overall seed, because they have Auburn next Saturday. Yeah, so they've got quite the stretch to close out this regular season. We'll see how they're able to cope with it. We'll see how the rest of college basketball pans out. We will be back on Tuesday with a mailbag episode. Please submit your questions if you have them. I'm happy to discuss all things bracketology, other things going on across college basketball, as well as we reach this final stretch of the season. And then on Thursday, we will be back once again. So don't miss it right here on 3 True Values. I'm your host, James Fletcher. Thanks for tuning in.